An estimated 7 million people turned out across the United States on the weekend for a No Kings protest. That's No Kings, as in Donald Trump. There were an estimated 2,700 events in all 50 states. What does this kind of organized movement suggest about the opposition to the Trump administration and his agenda, and implications for the midterm elections? Plus, former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton is indicted on 18 charges of transmitting or retaining classified information. We'll take a look at the strength or weakness of the indictment and talk about whether this is a case of political revenge.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, and this is our daily Potomac Watch podcast. And I'm here today with Mene Ukwe-Barua and Kyle Peterson, my comrades in arms on the editorial page. That not to be taken literally. Mene and Kyle work with the pen and the phone, I guess, as President Obama once said. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about the No Kings protest. Pretty big and much bigger than the one in June here in October. Mene, 7 million people is not a small number of people for an organized protest, and I mean, I'm trying to get a handle on just what this means. Is this just Democratic partisans turning out? Is it phony? Paid for, as some Republicans suggest? I don't think so. I mean, I get the impression there's a growing opposition here that is potentially formidable.
Absolutely. I think it was a really impressive show of political force from the left to be able to marshal this many ordinary people to take a day out of their lives and go demonstrate on the streets against the Trump administration. I think, as you mentioned, the fact that this was the second time that they've done this, the second No Kings rally, shows that there is really momentum building. It wasn't just pent up rage that Trump was reelected and is now back in the White House. You now see an ongoing movement of people who are upset with a lot of things that the Trump administration is doing, and trying to draw more public attention to what they think are sort of the worst grievances that they hold against the Trump presidency. I do think that it is going to really show Republicans that they're up against a big challenge in the midterms. We're kind of beginning to get toward the end of 2025. You see congressional candidates gearing up for 2026, trying to raise money and get their own bases excited for re-election. The fact that Democrats have this many people who are energized shows that they hold a certain amount of advantage. But I do think that the protests were mostly among committed left-wing partisans. You don't see moderate voters in swing states, for the most part, coming up at these rallies, which means that Democrats can say, our base is excited, our committed voters are going to go out there and vote, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're winning a broader messaging war and converting people who voted for Trump in 2024 or appealing to more moderate or swing voters, which they're also going to have to do as well. But one other note in terms of the composition, a lot of Republicans have been saying that these are Antifa protests, or that these protesters are paid by George Soros, and this is merely the most radical left wing of the Democratic Party, or that these are phony protesters. And as you said, I don't think there's evidence of that. It does seem to be really authentic disappointment with the Trump administration and a desire to raise a higher profile around some of the things that he has done in office.
There's no question that I think the protests were peaceful. I mean, that was, and thank heavens for that. People seem to be angry at Trump, but not particularly angry at each other and or at any of the police who might have been there to make sure that the protests were peaceful. That's a good thing. Doesn't certainly give any excuse for any a negative reaction from law enforcement. So that's useful. You guys might remember 2010 and the Tea Party protests, right? You know what the Democrats said at the time? They said, Charles and David Koch funded these, the oil executives. They were all it's all phony passion and paid for. Well, it wasn't. And people came out and voted. And I think the Republicans could make a mistake if they assume that all of this is just, again, paid for by a bunch of billionaires like Soros. But let's listen to President Trump's response when he was asked about the No Kings protest.
I think it's a joke. I looked at the people; they're not representative of this country. And I looked at all the brand new signs paid for. I guess it was paid for by Soros and other radical left lunatics. It looks like it was. We're checking it out. The demonstrations were very small, very ineffective, and the people were whacked out. When you look at those people, those are not representative of the people of our country.
Mr. President, besides San Francisco...
And by the way, I'm not a king. I'm not a king. I work my off to make our country great. That's all it is. I'm not a king at all.
Well, speaking to my fellow whacked out writer Kyle Peterson, what do you make of the president's response there?
Well, I think that he is at risk of doing what you're suggesting, which is just dismissing this out of hand when, he could take it as a signal that there is this building opposition and that there might be ways that he could respond to it if he wants to stay on the public's good side. I mean, whenever there is a grassroots movement, there are always political operatives who want to co-opt it or take part in it or help feed it. And so that is not something that doesn't happen, but you don't get 7 million people, that's the number reported, out in the streets just because a couple of big billionaires, donors wrote some checks. There is clearly some opposition to what Trump is doing, particularly with sending National Guard to these cities, with the ICE raids. I mean, he talked on the campaign trail about going after hardened criminals, about letting success be his retribution. And this might be a moment for him in the White House to reflect on whether going back to that sort of policy is politically wise.
And the big question here, Monet, is whether or not we are seeing the slow build of a kind of repeat of 2018, which was when Democrats gained so many seats and retook the House, and of course then went on to impeach Donald Trump. I think one of the interesting phenomena of the second Trump term was, unlike the first term, when the reaction to him was immediate. You had the resistance right from the beginning. Was this time you haven't had that. There was a kind of almost a bit of a resignation on the part of opponents that Trump had won the popular vote this time, that he had won every one of the hotly contested swing states this time, and that he had a comfortable victory in the Electoral College. So they couldn't go around saying it's illegitimate, because it certainly wasn't. And there was nothing like, there wasn't an immediate let's take to the streets. But what you've seen, I think, with some of the actions the administration has taken, I would point to two in particular. One is the ICE raids. I think that's galvanized a lot of opposition. And that's mainly traditional Democrats, and I don't think the public is necessarily as galvanized by that. But the question of the National Guard into some of these cities, I think, is a little dicier, and from the point of view of, just never mind the merits of whether or not the National Guard should play that role of crime fighting. But the idea that we really don't want the military in our streets. I think that's somewhat problematic politically for the president, Monet.
Yeah, I think you're right that the resistance to President Trump in his second term has built slowly over the course of his term, as opposed to firing right off the way that it did after his election in 2016. And I think that really shows that Trump came into office the second time around with an opportunity to appeal to the center much more than he has managed to actually do. I think that a lot of that resignation on the part of Democrats after the election was seeing that the country really had changed. All these swing states backed Donald Trump in his reelection because people wanted a president to come in and control the border, to reduce inflation, a whole lot of the core policies why he won. And there were a lot of people who didn't see him as a unique threat in the way that he was in his first term. But I do think that he has overplayed his hand in a lot of ways, and no way more so than with the ICE raids. It's interesting because Trump, before the election, seemed to realize that this was a possibility, knowing that there could be ugly graphics of federal officers detaining, poor single mother, and that the country would turn against him when they started to see those scenes. And yet he has let Stephen Miller and other people in his administration drive the immigration policy in exactly that path. And we're seeing the exact backlash that President Trump predicted. With regard to the midterms, though, whether we're getting set up for a potential 2018 style wave, I think we probably aren't. It's probably still going to be a close run for a couple of reasons. One is that the Democrats are much more unpopular now than they were in 2018. At that point, we were only a couple years removed from Barack Obama, who was a fairly popular, well-regarded president. A lot of people thought maybe we need to get back to something a little closer to Obama-style governance. And so they punished Republican congressional candidates at the polls. I think that Democrats now are associated with the Biden presidency and with runaway inflation, with transgenderism, with softness on crime. And so there are a lot of moderate voters who may think what Trump is doing is bad, but they don't want to swing all the way back to the Democrats. And then we've also seen a lot of districts get sorted much more. You don't see Republican candidates having won a lot of districts that Biden or Kamala carried in 2024. And so the opportunity for a big wave in the midterms just isn't nearly as significant as it was in 2018, despite the fact that Trump is increasingly unpopular.
All of those caveats, I think, are warranted, Monet. There's no question that the Democrats are still trying to get out of the Biden hole. They haven't really decided what they want to campaign on yet. There's no organized message other than "we're not Trump." But sometimes in the midterm elections, all you need is "we're going to put a check on Trump," and you get your enthusiastic voters to the polls, and Republicans may or may not be as significantly motivated. Last word on this, Kyle.
Yeah, and the vibes can change pretty fast. The party in power always feels pretty confident it can retain it, and the party out of power is always worried that it's forever. I mean, remember all the talk under Obama of the emerging Democratic majority, the country becoming less white, dooming Republicans forever to minority status. Then under President Trump, it was arguments about the Republicans have really figured out how to appeal to the working class. They broke the blue wall. They won some of these Rust Belt states. Then his performance in office during COVID, in particular, after January 6th, it was, will Republicans be ever back in power? And then Joe Biden found a way to foul up well enough that suddenly the Republicans became a pretty attractive alternative, apparently, in the 2024 elections. And so, the midterms are still a little ways out here, but I take the points that Monet makes about those, the sorting in the districts and so forth. But 7 million people coming out to these kinds of protests does suggest that there's a pretty particular swing. And, we'll have to see if Trump responds to that in any way or just continues trying to bait and inflame the opposition.
All right, let's turn to the John Bolton indictment. The former national security advisor for a period in Donald Trump's first term was indicted on 18 counts, 8 for transmitting national defense information and 10 counts of retaining such information. Now, the fascinating thing when you read this indictment is that the accusation is not that he shared this information with anybody, any country or anything like that. It's that he transmitted diary notes that he took himself based on his recollections of uh, of his time in the White House in anticipation, I think, of writing the book that he ultimately wrote. And he transmitted those diary notes to his wife and his daughter. They're known as Individual 1 and Individual 2 in the indictment, but I've confirmed through my reporting that that is his wife and daughter. So there's no allegation in the indictment that either one of those two people did anything with the diary notes. So you're going to have a question, I think, at some point in his defense here, Monet, of whether or not you can keep a diary that might have had some discussion of facts that the White House can allege, or the Justice Department can allege, violated national security laws. It wasn't as if he turned over, the classified documents to them. He was taking down his individual notes.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that there is a media debate or narrative brewing saying the Bolton indictment is different from some of the other politicized indictments that we've seen, including the one brought recently against James Comey and then the one against Letitia James. A lot of people looking at the Bolton indictment saying that there's more substance here underlying than with those two previous indictments. And that's true and should be discussed to a certain extent, but none of it changes the fundamental truth that this indictment very, very unlikely to have been brought if not for the personal vendetta that Donald Trump had against John Bolton. Part of the reason we can conclude that is that the Biden administration considered the same facts. The Biden administration, who is no fan of John Bolton, as they would be theoretically for James Comey and Letitia James, they would have loved to have an opportunity to get him if they thought that it was worth doing. They decided it wasn't worth pursuing. And I think that the underlying facts are that John Bolton probably erred by transmitting his personal notes to his family members. I would, at some point as we go down the course of this investigation, we might hear his explanation for why he did this, but that certainly was against procedure. But still, the fact that he was taking notes of things that he witnessed firsthand, not sharing them with any source that was likely to potentially do anything ill with them, suggests that he really was keeping them for the purpose of his own record keeping and writing a book. And the fact that he is being prosecuted for it, I think, is a breach of what the historic norm for when someone would be indicted for mishandling of classified information.
There's a section in the indictment that mentions that a foreign entity associated with Iran had hacked at one point after Biden was in the was out of the White House, had hacked his personal email and had got some of the transmissions that he had sent to his wife and daughter. It's unclear how many, but the really interesting point about that is that episode is that Iran was hacking him not because it wanted to find a lot of secrets so much as they wanted to kill him. He was targeted for assassination along with Mike Pompeo for his policy views on Iran. And John Bolton himself designated a representative to go to the administration. And in this case, it was, I think, the Biden administration, and informed them that he had been hacked. And so he provided that information to the administration, which now the Justice Department is using as to suggest somehow that Bolton, I think, and the purpose of this entry in the indictment, I think, is to suggest that he jeopardized national security in an important way, and yet there's no evidence that Iran used that at all, other than to try to get his whereabouts and then to kind of threaten him with a couple of emails in response. Kyle.
Similarly, the indictment makes an argument that Bolton knew that he shouldn't have had information on those systems, because look at the comments he made after the Signal Gate controversy, when members of the Trump
Mhm.
administration, including the defense secretary, were sharing information about coming strikes on the Houthis in a Signal chat. And what is kind of amusing about that is, I understand the point the indictment is trying to make, but John Bolton would be, I think, could fairly turn around and say, hang on, you're prosecuting me. And in the indictment, you're talking about the Secretary of Defense and other top officials sharing information that, might even be more sensitive than what John Bolton had in these diary entries via this commercial Signal chat app. And so that is maybe part of his selective prosecution, vindictive prosecution, defense on those charges. The other thing that is difficult about these kinds of cases is that there's allegations of classified material, and we, as members of the public who don't have top secret security clearances, don't get to see the underlying information often that is the basis of these kinds of cases. So, John Bolton has been a top official in the State Department, in the Justice Department, UN ambassador. I would be surprised if he was not very careful in the way that he was wording these diary entries that he was sending to himself. But the indictment is pretty spare, and so we're going to have to wait and see what other information comes out about what the government is actually alleging this national security information was.
Yeah, these cases, I mean, I think, to Benet's point that there's a media narrative that this is stronger than the Comey and Letitia James indictments is true to the extent that anytime you're dealing with a charge about the misuse of classified materials, juries tend to be very sensitive about that. So you can raise all kind of ominous implications if you're a prosecutor, and that will certainly put Bolton on the defensive. I should say that the book, which is I think the diary entries were preparing, where John was making to prepare for, he was making the diary entries to prepare for the book. He notes in his statement after the indictment, my book was reviewed and approved by the appropriate experienced career clearance officials. When my email was hacked in 2021, the FBI was made fully aware. In 4 years of the prior administration, after these reviews, no charges were ever filed. Then came Trump 2, who embodies what Joseph Stalin's head of secret police once said, you show me the man, and I'll show you the crime. Monet, last word.
Yeah, I think that it's important to draw a distinction between what Bolton is accused of doing and what Trump and Biden were accused of doing as regarded classified documents. Bolton didn't take home sheets of paper to his own personal residence and store them. He was taking notes about the things that he saw and experienced. And so I do think that he'll have a stronger case to make, suggesting that I didn't really mishandle the information, and him and his defense will attempt to basically say that the substance of some of these issues was contained in classified documents, but the way that I adapted it for recording my own personal notes doesn't cross the line into illegality. And I think that as regards Trump and Biden, the question was, should these charges be brought? But there was much less of a debate about whether they violated the letter of the law. It was with Trump, of course, the fact that he was president added a complication in the classification. But I think that there will be certain amounts of strength in the case that he will present, suggesting that he didn't violate the letter of the law in the way that he handled that information.
All right. Thank you, Monet. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch. So please join us the rest of the week. Thanks for listening.